Hi, I'm C.Kelly, AVLI Client Services Liaison and also a teacher with AVLI. And this presentation is on project-based learning. Project-based teaching and learning is essentially and conceptually experiential. Successful experiential learning requires just the right balance of structure to manage the complexities of open-ended and what are often real-world situations that the students are learning about, while you help the students understand and manage their responsibilities. So you'll need to plan ahead, especially when you're working with any external partners. If you partner with institutions or agencies, you obviously need to plan ahead. You need to be really clear about expectations for timeline and roles, both for your students and for any kind of external partners that you're working with. You will have to anticipate disruptions, such as moving in and out of class into online formats, and you can have alternative options built into place. The good news is that project-based teaching and learning is very well facilitated with online learning, so having those alternative options in place is relatively easy to do. You want to create opportunities for student agency throughout the process. If you let your students exercise choice and autonomy whenever possible and whenever appropriate, they're going to do better and they're going to get a lot more out of the experience. You want to align any real-world encounters with the learning outcomes, obviously, for your course, so that your students are going to be practicing the most relevant knowledge and skills along the way. Keep them focused and keep them tailored to what you want them to learn. And the experiences should draw out or build on the underlying concepts that you already have as frameworks for your course. So you probably already have a foundation in place to start projects. You want to determine the level of skills and the knowledge the students will need to succeed and make those really clear to them, especially at the more independent stages of the process. And you want to be able to structure your class so that you can provide the appropriate guidance and support when they are working independently. Finally, for distance learning, projects with external agencies and institutions are particularly suited to this. So you want to reach out in advance and you want to have those tools put into place, and some of those tools will be offered to you in this course. Are there risks involved? Yes, there definitely are. But believe me, the benefits outweigh the risks. Anytime you're allowing students to be moved ahead by their own sense of curiosity and developing the projects on their own, there's a certain amount of risk involved, but they learn an awful lot along the way. And also you want to be willing to let them take more ownership. Less us, more them, the cartoon says. Students that have autonomy really find a way to deepen their understanding, and their memory centers are activated so that their retention is much stronger. So less us, more them. The good news is that risk willingness pays off and has great benefits. This learning that is considered experiential contains, at a minimum, the following elements: development and experience with critical analysis and synthesis. That's pretty huge. An opportunity for deep and personal reflection. When the student is working on their own, you want to make sure that you give them time to do this, but it also offers them an opportunity to do it in a much more concise way and in a much more deeply personal way. Understanding and skill in ensemble environments and with teamwork, which is how we all work. We live in the real world working together, and understanding and skill in this kind of teamwork is something students gain from project-based learning. Opportunities for students to take initiative, to make decisions, and to be accountable for their results. It provides opportunities for students to engage intellectually, creatively, emotionally, socially, and sometimes physically even, depending upon the kind of project. It deepens learning, and it helps students to become better prepared for any kind of future courses they may have and for life's goals, and gives them transferable skills that can be used in a lot of different contexts, especially the ability to work with others. And finally, developing personal responsibility, which is a great goal for all students and for all of us. So what are the pedagogical benefits of experiential learning? When students are engaged in learning experiences that they see the relevance of, and the product has more significance than just a grade, they have increased motivation to learn, and they produce a much more thoughtful product. Experiential learning stimulates academic inquiry to enrich and apply the content students are learning, so students are able to understand on a practical and tangible level what the content is offering. the process by which art is created rather than just passive viewing, for example. Students that are encountering authentic opportunities for applying their learning find that they're more motivated. And finally, distance learning. Projects get kids up and out and away from the computer and away for reflection, for research and engagement with others. So even as you may be designing this project online and looking at their work online, you can still be getting the kids up and out and looking at their world through a more objective lens. How is it that these benefits are fostered in the student? Well, the process of engagement with project-based learning fosters autonomous learning, which influences the brain centers, and brain centers that are involved in memory, creativity, and problem solving in particular. This allows the students to bring forth, to tap into, and to increase multiple learning styles, or what used to be called multiple intelligences. In other words, it's a means of taking in, processing, and then making usable to the student the content in their course and what they're learning. Another great additional benefit that is fostered is that gender-based learning differentials come into play here, particularly in STEM fields. They're diminished because students are working independently and they're not seated in a large group where these kinds of differentials may impede their learning process. So how and when to use different kinds of projects and different sizes of projects. Let me show you some examples and go through individual projects, small group projects, and large group projects, and take a look at when and how they may be most effective. Let's take a look first at individual, art-oriented, and imagination-fueled projects. These projects are particularly suited to multiple learning styles, especially intrapersonal and musical and linguistic. Pedagogical benefits are provided and great formative assessment information can be gleaned along the way. There are extensive online tools that students can take advantage of and can use and can apply quite easily and effectively. And the keys to success are these. Projects need to be fun. They need to be student-driven. Students need to be given the room to fail. And individual mentoring needs to happen along the way. And we always need to remember that creativity is a process without critical inhibitors. So positive reinforcement, even when the student is trying and not quite succeeding and then trying again, are very important. What are some examples? I'll show you 3 examples. We'll talk a little bit about portfolios, and then I'll give you an explanation of a couple of examples of individual creative projects that have been developed that work out pretty well. So let's take a look at portfolios. We hear that term a lot, and surprisingly enough, people sometimes even still say portfolio. How can I get my student to do a portfolio? And I think we think of portfolio as the object, but really it's just it's an opportunity to have a single source that is evidence of students' work and of their understanding and achievements and of their learning overall. This is an example of a project that is sort of half portfolio and half art project. Actually, it's for a class in critical analysis of the arts, and just like with anything, you can sort of understand something better if you do it. If you play baseball, you have a better appreciation of baseball, for example. You're in the ballpark. And so I wanted my students to see the world through an artist's eyes so that they could critically analyze art and they could be inside the art, if you will. So this student had a collection of sticky notes that was something that were being prepared for a portfolio. And the assignment was to sit back, look at your surroundings, your desk in your room, and just using the objects that were there, see the world through the artist's eyes, and use whatever tools you had available and whatever elements you had available to express yourself in terms of how you were feeling right now about your work. Because as they were learning, art is process, product, and expression. And so this student said they felt like a digital computer character who just had so much to do and that was going back and forth across a computer screen, and took their sticky tabs and aligned them on the wall to make a computer generated person. And so looking at the world through the artist's perspective, this student managed to create an individually designed art project that effectively communicated how they were feeling at the moment, but the thing also contains, in a portfolio sense, their accomplishments overall through the course of the term. This is an example of a project that really was open-ended. All the students were told was that they were going to be time traveler historians and that they could go anywhere they wanted to in the course of history, and they had to just be reporters on the scene. And this particular student decided that they would be a reporter on the scene at the time during which Michelangelo created the David. And what this student managed to do was create a discourse between David and how David felt about the way Michelangelo portrayed him, and then compare it to Donatello. Completely open-ended assignment, and I didn't actually ascribe the student to learn about Donatello's David, but in the course of the student's inquiry, they discovered that on their own. So individually designed art projects and individually designed experiential learning projects give students an opportunity to follow their own sense of curiosity in a really effective way. So what about small group projects? I'm just going to recommend that the ideal size is 4 to 6. Uneven numbers don't seem to work that well for me. Maybe they will for you, but for me, group sizes of 4 to 6 seem to be ideal. This particular size of project is really great in terms of multiple learning styles because you can have teams that are made up of students who are each getting to excel at their own interests and what they enjoy learning about and what they enjoy doing. The pedagogical benefits and formative assessment information are there just as they are in the individual projects, and distance process happens in every format because students will have to be communicating probably online with one another. And what are the keys to success? Well, clear instructions on individual contribution and group organization are absolutely necessary. There needs to be a rubric that has a lot of clarity and that disallows pro forma presentations. And what I'm talking about here is if you do small group projects with your students, I tell them right up front, no reading online. They need to be able to really present the information in an authentic fashion or in a creative fashion, but the information has to be ingested to the point and processed to the point where they can share it really sort of out of their head and from their hearts. Mentoring is really important because you want to be working with students at every stage, and that helps with formative assessment as time is going on. And then student self-evaluation and completion is important. This gives them an opportunity to evaluate their contribution to the team effort. I'll share with you 2 examples of projects that have been tried and that have been successful. One is a project that we just called Museum Acquisition, and the other is a cost of living presentation. The cost of living presentation was really one of the more interesting projects that we did in terms of small groups. So students in groups of 4 had to create a budget for a family of 4 for a 6-month period. And so they had to find out a lot of information that hadn't come across their purview to date when they started the project. They had to plan for groceries, so they went grocery shopping. They had to find out how much rents were and where the rents were affordable. They had to find out how much childcare cost. They had to take a look at how much incomes were and how those incomes related to the cost of housing and to the cost of groceries and clothing and transportation. Needless to say, they learned a tremendous amount, and because they were working in teams and they got to choose which aspect of the team role they would play, students that were particularly adept at designing presentations could excel there. Students that were particularly adept at looking at statistics, they could excel there. Students that were very creative often wrote scripts or rendered for the presentation beautiful works of art. So that was a cost of living presentation that allowed students to really live in the real world temporarily and to really find out an awful lot of information that they could apply to the course at large, and that particular course was Poverty in America. An example of a course that allows students to think critically and also to contribute in terms of civic discourse was called the Museum Acquisition project. And students were divided into teams, and each team was assigned a work of contemporary art. And then the teams had to present to the curator their arguments in favor of acquiring one or another works of art. So students had to learn about the art, they had to learn about the historical significance of the artist, they had to learn about the cost of the art, they had to learn about the process of museum acquisition. It was just a peeling the onion level of layers in terms of what they actually learned about how things work in the real world in terms of artists. And in this case, these were artists from minoritized backgrounds, and the tension there between the formal art world and these artists hoping to have their work seen was really appreciated by the students and learned at a whole other level. So that was a museum acquisition project. And finally, let's take a look at large group or whole class projects. These are really great because you can actually combine some of the individual or small group projects along the way, and you can build a tier, a structure of projects for your course as time goes on. Multiple learning styles forte, spatial because sometimes students are out and moving around, kinesthetic, and interpersonal. While individually designed projects really bring out intrapersonal intelligence, what makes the student tick on the inside, how they feel. These large group or whole class projects really engage the students on an interpersonal level. The possibility of combining these individual and small group projects adds to that. Then there's a combination of in-class and distance process that can really work with large or whole class projects as students communicate on their own through distance or with you, and then as students draw back together for the project to actually reach fruition. What are the keys to success of large group projects? Well, student involvement in the design of the project is really key. You should let the students really step forward and say, here's what we want our project to accomplish, here's how we want it to look, and here's how we want our involvement in it to be assessed and to be engaged if we're offering our project to the larger community, say to a whole school, for example. They also should be involved in the rubric process and the end game, because then they take responsibility for their contribution to the project as a whole. The first project that I'll talk about in terms of an example is actually a project that I originally found through Oxfam, and that's a welfare simulation. And what that does is it casts the students in a class, the whole class, and sometimes larger than a class, into the role of a participant or an administrator or an agency or an institution involved in the process of seeking aid. In this case, the temporary assistance to needy families, which is what we arrived at after we reformed welfare in the United States. So students actually have to spend a fair amount of time finding out how to go about applying for welfare. People working in the agencies find out what's involved and whether or not assistance will be provided. And then in the end, students have the opportunity to share that information with other groups of students who have worked on the opposite end of the welfare spectrum. So that's a welfare simulation that was the end result of having small group projects along the way, eventually culminating in understanding really what is involved in applying for assistance, in this case, for welfare assistance in the United States. The next example that I'll talk about is the hunger banquet. And this is an activity that can actually involve one small class or a huge group, like a whole school. And if it involves the whole school, then a class perhaps is responsible for staging, if you will, the hunger banquet. What happens is that a group of students will be working on the statistics in terms of food scarcity and food abundance in a particular context in the world, and then they offer a banquet. And a very small percentage of the people invited to the banquet are seated at a beautiful table with white linen and have excellent service, and then the vast majority don't have that. And the huge majority winds up following the guidelines statistically of people in the world globally who live on less than $1 a day. And so this is an opportunity not just to engage a whole class, but potentially to engage a whole school. And the kind of deep learning that's involved here, I can attest to. I still receive emails from students who did the Hunger Banquet, gosh, it's embarrassing almost to say, but well more than a decade ago, that are still benefiting from what they learned there in terms of engaging with the world and in terms of their sense of empathy and their understanding in a global sense. So finally, just to complete, project-based learning engages literacy skills across all age ranges, and that's huge, and that includes adult learning as well. Motivating students for project-based learning for application or research methodology comes from the National Library of Medicine, and here's what they have to say. Project-based learning, as suggested by Bell, engages literacy skills of students from reading, writing, speaking, and synthesis of information, and they're motivated to complete a given task. And motivation is great when you're working with students, and when they have fostered that motivation on their own, it gives them a real sense of accomplishment. There'll be great examples of project-based experiential learning put into action if you read and watch the associated videos at the link here and those that will be provided in association with this presentation. Final thoughts are these. Experiential learning engages the brain's memory centers, mirror neurons, and problem-solving brain functions through hemispheric asymmetry. These are fancy words, but they're important because they go to the sense that the student is really having the kind of learning experience that will change their worldview in a way that just monocausal exchanges will not do. Passivity becomes impossible in experiential learning and in project-based learning and teaching. And students learn more, retain exponentially more, and they will not be passive in your classroom. And this gives you a sense of real understanding of who they are and who they can become in the future. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. We are here for you and we are here to serve, so let us know whatever we can do as you move the rest of the way through our course. Thanks so much. Bye.